terrorism, tension in the South China Sea, and the threat of a nuclear war. Southeast Asia faces some tough problems that could endanger security and prosperity in the region. Regional leaders will tackle these issues head-on at the 31st Summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations.
For those who are peace-loving, just like me, I do not want trouble.
Non-interference is a time-honored tradition in the regional bloc, but with these threats to regional security, is it time for ASEAN to lay down the law? This is On the Record. This is a special presentation of CNN Philippines on the 31st ASEAN Summit and related meetings here in Manila. I'm Pinky Webb. One of the topics of discussion in the meetings is security in the region. To give us a deeper understanding of this issue, joining me now are former Philippine Ambassador to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Ambassador Wilfrido Villacorta, Armed Forces spokesperson Major General Restituto Padilla, and military analyst and historian Jose Custodio. Gentlemen, welcome. You're all on the record.
Thank you for having us.
So let me start with this. What would be, Ambassador, I'll start with you. What do you think is the major security concerns facing the region? What would be the top security concerns?
Right now, the top security concerns are the nuclear crisis and the threat of recurring international terror. But of course, there are the usual concerns that have been covered in the past summits, and that would include climate change, disaster management, and other functional issues, and of course the South China Sea issue.
General Padilla, what about you?
From the standpoint of the defense and the armed forces, I guess the first two items that was mentioned by the ambassador was is to our mind going to be the top concerns for this ASEAN meeting. Number one, however, would be terrorism. There was already a prelude to the discussion in the earlier ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting about 2 weeks ago that showed a lot of indications that this is going to be a major topic for discussion. Then followed by of course, the North Korean nuclear crisis.
What would be the third for you?
Well, again, issues bordering on natural disasters and how we react as a region to each other's call for assistance would be another matter that will always have a part in all discussions now and in the future.
Mr. Custodio.
Well, the same with them, of course, but I'd like to say something that much of the security concerns of Southeast Asia is borne by the problems of stability of many of the nation states within. Okay, that's why in Burma you have the Rohingya crisis, which is a very major international concern now. Okay, then of course in our case it's the internal stability of the Philippines, which breeds all of these problems like terrorism. Okay, so it's the problem of state consolidation among Southeast Asian nations, having been products of European colonialism or American colonialism. So these countries, for the past 70 years, have been trying to consolidate their nation state. Okay, and that has bred a lot of problems, security problems, of which we talk about terrorism now.
Which we are facing right now.
Which are facing right now.
But what do you think about ASEAN in terms of the security concerns that we've talked about? Many of course, everything, all of you have that in common. The top security concerns, talking about the nuclear crisis. General Padilla saying, of course, number one for them would be terrorism, and same with you, Mr. Custodio. But is ASEAN adequately addressing these security concerns?
Well, ASEAN will have a problem addressing security concerns, given, of course, the fact that it is inherently a body that cannot really decide on something as crucial as the affairs of state of an internal nation. Okay, So that being said, much of the problems have to be solved by the nation state itself, okay, the president, by the governments itself.
But
okay?
does this is this
So-
because of the non-interference
Yeah,
policy
yes,
that
of
has been in
course.
the charter since 2007?
Since 2000. And the thing is that ASEAN members can do is try to rally support, okay, provide assistance or what have you, but to really try to fundamentally change certain things or address things, it's really up to the states themselves.
General Padilla, what about you? Let's talk about terrorism, just in particular.
That's right.
Is ASEAN adequately addressing this concern?
I suppose so. I suppose so. ASEAN, although it has a non-interference charter, is already on the road to becoming more realistic about the security challenges it poses. Case in point is this mechanism called the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting. It's still ASEAN. It's in the context of the whole ASEAN spirit. Although non-interference is there in the main charter, our defense ministers are now closely aligned on many matters that are of mutual interest to everyone. Of course, the borders that separate us are very porous, particularly in the southern part of our archipelago. And this is the subject of a recent agreement amongst Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines.
But just to refresh our memory, sir, that tripartite agreement born out of, well, many things, especially, of course, the Marawi crisis, sir. Is this new? Is this something new, the tripartite agreement between Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines?
It's new in the sense that it's getting a new shot in the arm to make it much more relevant and to make it much more responsive to the requirements of our security environment. Although it's not new in the sense that we have had bilateral agreements with Indonesia and Malaysia as far as border discussions are concerned. But I say it got a new shot in the arm because of the need to make it more responsive in light of increasing abductions at sea, primarily perpetrated from our side of the house. And there are many common maritime areas of concern that we need to address. So this is where the focus of attention is now being brought to.
Right. Ambassador, what about you?
Because ASEAN, not only ASEAN, but the world is now faced with two major global crises, and I mentioned the nuclear crisis and also the terrorism issue. It offers the incentive, the motivation for ASEAN countries to redefine individual national interests, for them to expand the concept, and more important, and to realize that more important than national interests as traditionally defined is the global interest. And there's no contradiction between national interests and global interests, especially in this day and age, especially now that we have to accept that we might be at the brink of a war, a nuclear world war. I am going to make the fearless forecast that these big powers will talk more about their commonalities, common concerns, which are the two leading issues that three of us identified.
It's a regional concern. We'll be talking about the maritime dispute in the South China Sea and tensions in the Korean Peninsula. That comes right after the break. Please stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching On the Record, focusing now on the ASEAN regional security. Still with me, our former Philippine representative to ASEAN, Ambassador Wilfrido Villacorta, AFP spokesperson, Major General Restituto Padilla, and military analyst and historian Jose Custodio. We were talking about the Korean Peninsula. Very important, of course, the tension over there, the ongoing back and forth, talking about Pyongyang and Washington first and foremost.
Well, the thing is that one has to first differentiate, okay, what is actually going on there, and what is what appears to be an agenda of powers to use what's going on in the Korean Peninsula to advance their own regional interests. Okay, so one has to differentiate. One has to be very careful about if what we're hearing from the Korean Peninsula is an actual state of war or it's nearing war or what have you. Okay, one must realize first that the North Korean military is practically just like the Iraqi military of Desert Storm, 1991. Okay, and everybody was saying so much about the Iraqi military, and when you had Desert Storm, it turned out to be a pushover. Okay, because it had so much limitation. So that's the thing with North Korea. Okay, my perception here, it's a lot of noise.
Is it Psy-war? Would you
it's a
call
lot
it
of
that?
Psy-war going. There's a lot of noise going on. But if push comes to shove, North Korea will be suicidal to start a war. Okay, it cannot win a war. Okay, and for example, and then when it comes to us here in this part of the world, okay, we shouldn't think that North Korea has the capability to destroy us, okay, here in this country, okay. I mean, it does have nuclear weapons, but its delivery capabilities are very, very limited, okay. As most likely, it's going to prioritize South Korea as a military target, because that's where all the American ground forces are. The thing here is that we will still be affected in the sense that economy will always, the business climate will always react
but
negatively.
Is it going to affect us because of the regional concern?
It's going to affect us in terms of regional concern, of course, the problems in the stock market, things like that. Our concerns of OFWs there, families will be worried and things. So the military here has to plan ahead for an evacuation, because sometimes the North Koreans can just lob a few shells over the border and send everybody into a panic. Because that's the thing.
General Padilla.
Well,
we talked about this before.
Yes, we did. And but first off, the common agenda of ASEAN is to maintain a very stable environment for economic development, to preserve the drive for prosperity. So actually, that's a common and very basic and mutual aspiration of all the ASEAN countries, to preserve those economic gains, to ensure that they are developing so that they can provide for all of their constituents, for their citizens. Now, anything that will shake that foundation is a threat. And hence, one of the looming threats that they saw that is already in the offing, besides the sure threat of man-made disasters because of climate change, that is why HADR responses are always in vogue and is always a topic for discussion, is the threat of terrorism, because this is what we saw happening in the southern backdoor as a very porous area where terrorists have come in. And the case of Marawi, the attacks recently in Europe and in America lately of lone wolf types of incidents. Now, this is going to be a main topic. How do you prevent these kinds of lone wolf attacks, and how do you preserve the secured environment that will allow for economic prosperity? These, I guess, are the essential topics that will go into that, besides perhaps discussions on what will happen in North Korea. I do believe, yes, that this is a lot of noise, but then it still takes the case of a lot of issues on the ASEAN side, on guarantees from America, guarantees from Japan and its other security partners, in the plus side of the house, on how they can best control that part of our region.
Ambassador, do you agree? Number one, do you agree that this could be suicidal for North Korea?
Yes. First, we have to analyze why is North Korea so keen in being a nuclear superpower that could attack the United States or any part of the world. It is mainly for regime survival, so that as our military historian Professor Custodio has said, it would be really suicidal in terms of its short-term and long-term objective. It wants its regime to survive and for him to, relish the glory of being a not only a surviving but a reigning military power. We should, instead of provoking North Korea to do something suicidal or crazy, to have a dialogue with North Korea, while the man is still has some elements of sanity, right? With respect to the Philippines, even if the target, the immediate target of North Korea in case of a nuclear war will not be the Philippines, but we will be part of the collateral damage. We're very near the Korean Peninsula. the area that will be affected by nuclear war, even confined to the region.
Okay. But if you talk about North Korea and that threat, sir, I mean, as Mr. Custodio was saying, it's going to be South Korea, possibly Japan.
Yeah,
They're even looking at Guam before it even gets here. We're still going to talk about the South China Sea dispute, and also we'll be scrutinizing the non-interference policy of ASEAN and if it's still relevant at this time. We're now on the final stretch of On the Record. We've discussed about top security concerns. Next up, the South China Sea issue. The president befriending China and somehow setting aside the arbitrary ruling. Let's start with Mr. Custodio. What are your thoughts on that coming into the ASEAN?
Well, came as a shock to all of us last year, okay? And but the thing is that what I just want to see there is that I just hope that there's a policy really guiding this administration as it deals with China and because if the past year is an indicator, all of the confusing statements coming from the administration when it came to China made us suspect that there was no guiding policy, really, no coherent guiding policy regarding this shift to China. And that being said, if that is true, then China is laughing its way all the way to the bank, okay? Because that's like that would be very good for them, because as long as we're confused, then it gives them time to consolidate. And if the military intelligence is correct in its assessments, then the Chinese have actually been consolidating in the South China Sea the past year, okay, taking advantage of the respite given to them by the Philippines.
Do you think there's going to be a more definitive guiding policy?
Well, you ask my personal opinion. No, of course not. I think they will be, how the British would call it, what the British would call it, like blundering along, okay, through this entire situation, feeling its way.
From the time, sir, that there was no decision yet on the arbitral ruling to the decision made and to the president's pronouncement, President Rodrigo Duterte, has there been some sort of shift, or was there more confusion for the Navy, even for the Coast Guard? Well, of course, that's a different department, pero because of this so-called, it appears there might not be a very clear guiding policy here, sir.
Well, I'd like to correct the perception. There is a clear guiding policy.
Okay, for you there is.
For us there is. So, and in fact, there are already mechanisms that have been put in place since the time that the president himself has made an announcement of a shift in the way we treat China and the way we treat our other allies. So he termed it independent foreign policy, which is actually part of our constitution. So there, the bilateral mechanisms and the mechanisms now set in place allow us to discuss this bilaterally and directly with China, particularly concerns about our common issues in the South China Sea.
How do you discuss it with them, sir?
We have what we call a BSM, a bilateral strategic mechanism. This meets once or twice a year, and this venue is actually a place where we can discuss WPS or West Philippine Sea matters. So I think the president took a different tack because of the perception on his part that we cannot depend on anyone else but ourselves. So if there's anything that erupts in the West Philippine Sea, the South China Sea, are we assured of an immediate reaction on the part of others who have voiced their commitment to assist us? Well, in his perception and according to the guidance that we have taken, we cannot count on that, and we can only count on ourselves. So how do we now deal and negotiate our position and put our national interests at the fore? And the way he has been treating it, I think, is the best means by which he sees we pushing our national interests. And precisely so, he made some promises during the election that our fishermen will be able to go back and make their living out of the seas that we have been fishing for so many centuries. Now, our fishermen are back in Scarborough. That's one of a promise delivered. Another one is
inside, outside.
Inside also. We're inside the shoal. We're not only outside, we're inside the shoal. The issue of
until now, sir, we can go inside the shoal.
We can go inside. And
with their permission.
No. We can go freely. We'll check that out. Although we can bring in bigger ships. That's the point.
Yung mga
Now,
bangka lang.
we'll try to do this in a slow process.
Well, the Chinese have the trawlers, right?
Cool. But the point here is that we have begun. And then the other issue is how do we extract our minerals without anyone interfering in the way we would like to do that? So the discussions are there. There are bilateral engagements that are being conducted. We're getting assistance for counter-terrorism drive, similar with what we got from other countries. We're trying to balance out our engagements without really letting off on our main and principal and old-time allies.
All right, so very quickly, we've run out of time. Final words, Mr. Custodio, I'm going to start with you.
Well, again, I would like to reiterate, based on last year's performance, I still really don't think that there's an actual policy. No matter how much the spokesman of the AFP would say so, that I still think there's a lot to be done, and regarding to have a coherent policy wherein we will face what China is doing against us, okay, in the West Philippine Sea area, okay. And like I said, it's like we're happy with the crumbs while they get the goodies.
General Padilla, sir.
Well, we still are of the perception that we are on the right track regarding these things. Again, the common thing that we put in mind is the greater interest of our country, our citizens everywhere, including those that we prize as our possessions for a long time historically. So we will keep watch, we will do our mandate, we will abide by the policy of this administration, and we will put in all our comments and suggestions if we see something that will further improve that.
Ambassador Villacorta, sir.
I'm very optimistic about the outcome of the ASEAN summits as well as the East Asian summit. I have trust in the big powers this time that they will all act responsibly, and of course we have to continue our support for the present administration in pursuing an independent foreign policy and amity with all nations as dictated by the Constitution.
Gentlemen, thank you. And thank you, of course, to our guest, former Philippine Ambassador to the ASEAN, Wilfrido Villacorta, AFP spokesman, Major General Restituto Padilla, and military historian, Jose Custodio. And thank you for joining us. I'm Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines.